We're in a place called Banshaw Park in Toronto. And today what I would like to do is take you on a little walk tour of a place that I like to go to, which last year actually, during the summer, I wrote most of my video content over here. All the inspiration that I got it from this particular park here. In today's Neville Goddard conversation, I would like to talk about fourth dimensional thinking. And I would like to talk about it from a few perspectives. Number one is this particular quote here from Neville. The second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, is trying to become self-conscious in the body so that he may be about his Father's business. What are his labors? To imitate his Father, to become master of the word, master of his inner talking, so that he may mold this world of ours into the likeness with the kingdom of love. So that's our purpose, to mold this world of ours into the likeness of the kingdom of love. As I always say, you are love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Existence itself, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Now, the old man, as referred to in the Bible, the old man may think in terms of separation when it comes to relationships, which is what I would like to focus on today. I mentioned that one of the ways that I have practiced this over the years is to be aware of my inner dialogue in relation to conversations, prior to conversations, during conversations, and after conversations. I'm aware if I think of in terms of separation with the other person. And this could be one-on-one with another person, or it could be group with another person. It could be, let's say, if you're a public speaker speaking at an event or something like that. Good morning. So what ends up happening then is being aware of your inner dialogue in relation to the person or the group of people is helpful to acknowledge if you are embodying the second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us. So what happens then is if the individual is not thinking from the premise of fulfilled desire with respect to the person, then they can in that moment disentangle their minds from the evidence of the senses. Now, I always teach, go to the end. You are love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. You exist now in a perfect state. You are in heaven now. Thus, the second man, who is becoming self-conscious in the body, starts to acknowledge the inner speech that is not from the premise of being fulfilled. And at any moment, the individual is aware of that speech that is not from the premise of truth, not from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. The individual can, in that moment, disentangle their mind. So practical examples would be, let's say you're about to start a conversation with someone. Perfect example, I said good morning to that person that was sitting there, and what happened was I didn't think in terms of separation prior. So back in the days, prior to starting conversations with people in business, or when I was out and about, or with friends, or while I was traveling, I would feel a sense of separation. And there's no shame and condemnation in that. That sense of separation belongs to old man thinking, who thinks in terms of separation. So I was aware of that, and I simply did not identify with that thinking anymore. In the moment, I would disentangle my mind from the evidence of the senses. So by disentangling my mind from the evidence of the senses, I found that I automatically started the conversation with the person without any resistance, because that is what I genuinely desire to do. Now, also during conversations, let's say you're having a conversation with a person, and there are thoughts of doubt, shame, condemnation towards yourself or the other person. It is important to acknowledge that there actually is no real separation in reality. The good thing about this is I can see if there's anyone writing their bike or rollerblading in the back, and I can move out of the way. So, to disentangle the mind from the evidence of the senses in relation to an appearance was helpful because, let's say I was thinking in terms of separation. Good morning. What would happen was all of a sudden I would feel disconnected with the person. I would feel that illusion of separation, which is not real. Now, this world appears, we could say, to be separated, but it's actually not. Fundamental reality, existence itself, is not separate. The world appears, yes, but it appears from the premise of completion. And so in the moment, we can acknowledge that. In the moment, you could say, I may remind myself in the moment. I may say, you know what? There is no separation here. Why do I think in terms of separation? No shame and condemnation. Put off that conversation. Or I may say something like, we have a wonderful conversation. I'm saying this to myself as I'm having a conversation with the person, while I'm being present. This may be helpful for you, but I'm able to do this in the moment. So while I'm having the conversation with the person, I'm aware if I'm thinking in terms of separation. And if thoughts of separation arise in mind, again, they could be shame, condemnation, or doubt, in relation to, for example, a person might say, does this person like me? Does this person love me? Consider they are, unconditional love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So I acknowledge that in the moment. I be still in the moment. I acknowledge that the fact of existence, there is no separation. In the fact of existence, there is no separation. So we can say the second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, knows that certainly. Yet the old man may think in terms of separation, and the old man is an illusion. The old man, which sometimes is referred to as the illusion of the separate self, is an illusion. So the practice is to release that identification in the moment. Let's actually walk, and I'll show you some of these statues over here. Beautiful view. So, the old man who thinks in terms of separation is an illusion. Why do I say that? Because separation is an illusion. Now, before we go any further, what practical benefit does this have in a person's life? Well, many benefits. For example, in personal relationships like friendships, you'll find that as you remain as you are, which means you're not identified with thoughts of separation, the conversation flows. Let's say, for example, you make videos on social media like this, like I do, or you do sales presentations all day long, or you do sales calls, or public speaking, or connect with people in various shapes and forms. You'll find that the conversations flow. There is what we call in improv, yes and. There is no but. There's yes and. So what happens is you relate to the person and you add to the conversation. So an example would be, let's say if a person says something, if a person thought in the moment that that person was saying something to imply separation between the two, let's say the person said, I am not interested in your opinion, or I don't like your opinion, and the person that hears that now starts to think in terms of separation, then they might start arguing with the person as communication that appears to be in conflict with the other person. So remember, when I say other person, I'm talking about the appearances. There actually is no separation. There's only God. And by this, I mean that the essence of the individual, each person, the foundational reality, the awareness of being, is God. Everything that the individual thinks from is either from, you could say, old man beliefs or from the premise of truth. No separation. So now, let's say the individuals are having conversation and then the old man thinking arises in relation to what the other person said, they may turn into, or may appear to be, a conflict. Now, in that moment, they can acknowledge there is no separation. Be still. Feel the reality that there is no separation. And then the conversation flows. So the yes and appears. The person understands the other person's perspective and adds to the conversation. Like, for example, in sales and business, client acquisition, if the prospect gives an objection, the sales professional might think that the person does not like them or does not accept them the way they are based on what the other person said. If they pause for a moment, they realize that that's an illusion of separation. That kind of thinking belongs to the old man. So, what they can do in that moment is acknowledge that, and then what they'll notice is they'll intuitively come up with an idea. They'll know what to say. Immediately, in the moment. It may be a thought to, let's say, overcome that objection. That's how we say it in sales, overcome the objection. That just shows up in mind exactly in the moment. This is even true in personal relationships, dating relationships, etc. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up the camera and we'll continue our conversation. So, let's continue our conversation. Now, the individual automatically, via intuition, it appears that an idea arises in mind. An idea from the source, that's from God. Intuition provides the insight. And it can happen automatically, where a person automatically says the thing that after they say it, let's say it appears as they want to do the deal. Or they may say, you know what, that's a great idea. Let me think about that for a moment. Let me get back to you next week. And sure enough, they get back to you next week and they say that wonderful idea or that wonderful perspective resulted in a shift. See, it appears that the individual is doing this. God does it. I can of myself do nothing. The Father within doeth the work. So that's an example of how in the moment of not identifying with an illusion of separation, an idea arises in mind of what to say, or the individual may automatically say it because they're not identified with illusions of separation. So again, this can be also true in relationships. For example, the individual is having a conversation with their partner. The partner seems to suggest to this individual illusions of separation. For example, the partner may say, you are always like this, like that. Name whatever illusion of separation. Now, no shame and condemnation to either of them. If this person in that moment acknowledges that there is no separation, regardless of what the person says, something interesting happens. All of a sudden, they see that yes and moment. And it could turn out in many different, let's say, conversation styles or what they say specifically. The answer is depends. For example, I've seen it in my personal life as, I understand how you feel. I felt that before. As a matter of fact, I remember an experience where I felt that way. And what I found was, and then what I experienced during the conversation with the person, by the way, in sales and in leadership, we call this feel, felt, found. What we find is the conversation flows. So it is not fighting reality, or more specifically, the appearance of God. And by that I mean very specifically, that delight is everywhere. Even if the individual, through interpretation, may not see delight in the conversation, it's there. The individual, we could say, can witness delight being there by, on the screen of space, the individual can witness the light being there by being still. So the light from within, the source of light is God. The light from within appears as a transformational conversation or a conversation that is harmonious. This is interesting because in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill called God infinite intelligence. So when a person thinks of light, they may think of, for example, a light bulb or the light from the sun. What I speak of is the light of consciousness, which is infinitely intelligent. There's intelligence appearing here. That's the light of God. We allow it to happen. We let the light be as the light was. So now Neville states, we are told that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But do we know that man's thinking follows the tracks laid down in his own inner conversations? To turn the tracks to which he is tied in the direction in which he wants to go, which again is from the premise of truth, to mold this world of ours into a likeness with the kingdom of love. He says, we must put off our former conversation, which is called in the Bible the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of our mind. Speech is the image of mind. Therefore, to change their mind, they must first change their speech. By speech is meant those mental conversations we carry on with ourselves. So these mental conversations we carry on with ourselves in relation to the person appear prior to the conversation in mind. We may witness them in mind during the conversations and also after conversations. If they're not from the premise of truth, we put off those former conversations. Prior to conversations, for example, we imagine ourselves having a wonderful conversation in which it plays out in a mutually beneficial way. During the conversation, if you identify with an illusory thought, and by that I mean unreal thought, not from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, no shame and condemnation, there's nothing wrong with you because you are love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. The old man is being released. We simply put off that former conversation and imagine the person to be in a harmonious relationship with you. You can do this, as mentioned, by being still in the moment as well. As you be still in the moment, you release the identification to the old man thinking. You return to the acknowledgement, we could say, of being love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So then what happens is the conversations flow. Now, after the conversations, there's also an opportunity. They can say to themselves, that was a wonderful conversation. It appears more and more so that we relate ideally together. We found some clarity in that conversation. Or they could say, clarity arises. Watch how clarity arises. Notice how this thinking is from the premise of fulfilled desire. Notice how this thinking is from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, which are words that I like to use that point to the fact that there's no separation. Okay, so we're going to head back to the car. This was a wonderful conversation today. Thank you very much for showing up for this conversation. It's always so much fun. This is a Friday morning conversation, although this video will be released on Sunday. So let's recap what we've discussed thus far. Number one is the second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, is trying to become self-conscious in the body, that he may be about his Father's business. What are his labors? To imitate his Father, to become master of the Word, master of his inner talking, that he may mold this world of ours into a likeness with the kingdom of love. So this is your true nature. Love is your true nature. And so you can, prior to conversations, during conversations, after conversations, relate lovingly, relate ideally with another person. And as you do that, the illusions of separation, which belong to the old man, are released. And it appears as harmonious conversations with people, wonderful harmonious relationships in business, friendships, family life, etc. Number two, he mentions that we are told that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But do we know that the individual's thinking follows the tracks laid down in their own inner conversations? To turn the tracks to which they are tied in the direction which they want to go, they must put off the former conversation, which is called in the Bible the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of their mind. Speech is the image of mind. Therefore, to change their mind, they must first change their speech. So, changing our speech is a matter of being aware if the conversations are not from a premise of fulfilled desire, the premise of fulfilled desire. What do we desire? Well, we desire love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. That is what we authentically desire. So, if the conversations are not from the premise of truth, with respect to the person prior to the conversation, during the conversation, or after the conversation, or all of them, we put off those former conversations. And so he also said, the habit of seeing only that which our senses permit renders us totally blind to what we otherwise could see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctness of reality. So, with respect to this quote, there are opportunities that could present themselves to disentangle the mind as applicable. So, the way I do it is if I start thinking from the premise of not being fulfilled, illusions of separation, lack of love, lack of happiness, lack of peace, lack of bliss, lack of prosperity, if I start thinking this way, I know certainly that it is not from the premise of truth. It is not from the premise of fulfilled desire, because I truly desire to witness heaven on earth, to appear to mold this world of ours into a likeness with the kingdom of love. That is your true nature. That is my true nature. That is our true nature. So if the senses, if someone says something and I interpret what they're saying to not be from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, I disentangle my mind from the evidence of the senses. Now, this is what I've been practicing for years. And through this practice, I have built 3 successful businesses, wonderful harmonious relationships, wonderful lifestyle, friendship where I could walk around, be at ease, connect with people. A lot of times what happens when I go for these walks is I stop and I talk to people and I have conversations with them, applying exactly what it is that I'm talking about here. In the earlier stages, I noticed that these kinds of patterns, these old man thinking patterns, would appear more often. So no shame and condemnation. I stopped thinking that way. I started to think from the premise of truth, and those illusions of separation dissolved, and the conversations became flow-based. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto suggestion to further encourage. You could say, I think ideally from the premise of knowing that I am love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. People appear to be in harmony with me as I am in harmony with them. All people appear to reveal heaven on earth with increasing frequency on a continuous basis as far as the senses perceive.